Hi, thanks for watching Bible Mountain. In this video, I'm going to talk about the importance of precise biblical interpretation. When I was in college, I spent a year studying in Jerusalem, Israel. At the school I was at, there were a couple volunteers there from Finland. And one day, some of my fellow American students and I were sitting around talking with these Finnish volunteers, and these Finnish volunteers were expressing some of the frustration they were experiencing communicating with us American students because we are sloppy with how we use our language. One of the examples they used was the question, "How are you?" And us Americans, when we see somebody, we say, "Hi, how are you?" But the reality is, we don't really mean the question. That phrase, "How are you?" is merely a greeting. We're not really expecting an answer. And these Finnish volunteers pointed out that we often ask that question, "How are you?" but we might ask it as we're walking past somebody and we don't even stop and wait for an answer. For these Finnish volunteers, it was very disorienting because English was not their native language. And when they heard that question, "How are you?" they were understanding that was a question, and yet all these American students weren't really asking it as a question. And so it was a little disorienting to them, a little frustrating to them. The point is, we Americans are very sloppy in how we use our language. Unfortunately, we carry that sloppiness over into how we interpret the Bible. We're very sloppy with how we interpret the Bible. And the Bible is clear that we should not be sloppy with it. And we see that in Galatians 3 verse 16, and it reads, and this is Paul writing, "Now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. He does not say, and to seeds, as referring to many, but rather to one, and to your seed, that is, Christ." Now the point is, Paul made a theological argument here, and he was quoting from the book of Genesis, and his argument was based on the fact that the word seed in the book of Genesis is singular and not plural. And so this points out the importance of being precise in interpreting the Bible. Now the book of 3 John contains an example for us that illustrates the importance of being precise with the Bible and being very clear about what we know and what we don't know. And we see this in 3 John 1, so let's take a look at that. And that reads, "The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth." So this verse tells us who wrote the book of 3 John. But all it tells us is the elder wrote it. It doesn't tell us who the elder was. However, this book is called the third book of John. And for many centuries, it has been accepted that this book was written by John. But the question is, do we actually know that? So there's a couple ways to know who wrote a particular book of the Bible. One is from the book itself. And we see in this case, 3 John only tells us it was written by the elder, but it doesn't say who the elder was. It doesn't tell us for sure that the elder's name was John. The other way that we know who wrote books of the Bible is through what is often called church tradition, or another term for it is extra-biblical sources. See, back in the 1st century AD and the centuries following, there were a lot of documents written by Christians that did not make it into the Bible. And a lot of those extra-biblical writings contain a lot of valuable information. We don't treat them as inerrant because they're not part of the Bible. We don't treat them as being inspired by the Holy Spirit. But that doesn't mean that they're not accurate, or that doesn't mean that they're not reliable. That doesn't mean that there's not good information in them. And so oftentimes some of these extra-biblical sources give us good information on who wrote certain books of the Bible and who they were written to. However, in the case of 3 John, even looking at these extra-biblical sources, there's really nothing that tells us for sure that John wrote the book. So then the question arises, why is it that for centuries it has been assumed that John wrote the book of 3 John? Well, it has to do with some similarities between 3 John and other books of the Bible. So let's take a look at that. So again, we see here in 3 John 1, it reads, "The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth." Now, if we go to 2 John verse 1, that starts out very similar. "The elder to the chosen lady and her children, whom I love in truth." And so we see 3 John starts out the elder, and 2 John starts out the elder. And then you have who it's to the beloved Gaius, to the chosen lady. And so we see there are similarities between the book of 3 John and the book of 2 John. Now let's take the similarities further. We also see in 2 John, verse 6, this verse, "And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, that you should walk in it." And so there's this concept here that loving God means to obey him. That's a concept that we also see in John 14, verse 15. "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And so we see some similarities in the theme and the things that were taught in these letters. Now we know that the Gospel of John was written by John. And so if John and 2 John were written by the same person because of the similarities, and if 3 John was also written by the person that wrote 2 John, then we know that John wrote 3 John because we know that John wrote the Gospel of John, and if 2 John and 3 John were the same author, then that would tell us that John also wrote 2 John and 3 John. The problem is there's a lot of ifs in there. Now it's likely, my inclination is to say yes, John wrote the book of 3 John, but the point is we don't really know for sure. So this is an example of the kind of precise detail that we need to look at as we interpret the Bible, and we need to make sure that we're very clear about what we know and what we don't know. And so in this case, John probably wrote the 3 John, but we can't really say that for sure. Now there's another example in 3 John, and that has to do with who the book is written to. So let's go to 3 John 1 again, and we see that the book of 3 John was written to Gaius. Now the name Gaius is mentioned several times in the New Testament. In Acts 19 verse 29 it says, "Dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia." And so this is a reference to a Gaius who was from the city of Macedonia. We also see a reference to a Gaius in Acts 20, and here it says he was accompanied by Gaius of Derbe. So we see the name Gaius, but this Gaius was from Derbe. Now Derbe is in Asia, Macedonia is in Greece. And so this tells us that Acts 19 and Acts 20 are referring to two different men named Gaius, because the one was from Greece and the other one was from Asia. In Romans 16, there's a reference to a man named Gaius. And then in 1 Corinthians, there's a reference to a man named Gaius, and that reads, "I thank God that I baptized none of you except Crispus and Gaius." Now, these last two references to Gaius, it doesn't really tell us who they are, so we don't know if they're the Gaius mentioned in Acts 19, or the Gaius mentioned in Acts 20, or if this is a third or perhaps a fourth man named Gaius. And so the point is, when we go to 3 John and read that it was written to the beloved Gaius, we don't know much about Gaius. We don't even know for sure that this is a man who is mentioned elsewhere in the New Testament. And again, this is an example of the sort of precision that we need to be using when we read the Bible and interpret the Bible. We have to take notice of these details. And the reason we have to notice these details is because of what we read in Galatians 3:16, where Paul made this theological argument that was based on the fact that in the book of Genesis, the word seed was singular and not plural. Once again, thank you for watching Bible Mountain. If you haven't already done so, please join my email list. My email list is free. In order to join, go to BibleMountain.com, click on email, and that will take you to a place where you can sign up. Your email address will not be sold nor given away. Once again, thank you for watching Bible Mountain.